Glenn Church is an entrepreneur from the earliest ages. He founded his own company when he was still a student at UC Santa Cruz, a landscaping company. And he is a fourth generation resident of North County. His heritage includes the fact that his dad was supervisor for that district as well from 1965 to 1977. And Glenn lives on and manages that family property that the family has had since the 1920s. He's been involved in numerous local, state, national organizations, including the board of directors of Amnesty International, president of the Fire Safe Council of Monterey County, involved with the Prunedale and Aromas Granges, the Salinas Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency Interim Board, and Concerned Citizens of North Monterey County. And after knocking on 10,000 doors in the last election, he came in first among several in the primary and won the general election. And his district 2 includes, I'll just read the list. Areas include Aromas, Baranda, Castroville, Las Lomas, Moss Landing, North Salinas, Pajaro, which we're hearing so much about, and Prunedale and Royal Oaks. And that is an area with relatively fewer residents in incorporated areas, and so a large unincorporated constituency that he serves. And he and his wife, Catherine McKenzie, wrote the local history book, Humbled, How California's Monterey Bay Escaped Industrial Ruin. And we had a presentation from him some while back on that very interesting piece of local history. So with that, Glenn, will you take it away and tell us about your priorities and your experience of your first 100 days?
Sure, I shall do that. Just so I got a grasp of your time schedule and leaving time for questions. Does your meeting go to about 1, or does it go past that? How long should I talk?
We'd like to let everybody get back to their days around, I'd say 1:10 to 1:15.
Okay. All right. So I just yeah, that should be very good. Thank you very much. And I thank everybody for inviting me here from the league. As Marianne said, Kathy and I were on here, was it 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago with the book, and that was a very nice experience. And now I'm back in a different role. I think as I get into this 100 days, there's a lot of interesting things that have happened over not just 100 days, but prior to that. So I think I'm gonna kind of roll back a little bit and actually do a quick recap on this campaign and the transition, because that's something that's not really talked about a lot. And that was probably for me one of the things I was probably least prepared for, was the transition from candidate to supervisor. This is, as you mentioned, Marianne, my dad had been a county supervisor out here, and between 65 and 77. And so, I had that real advantage of seeing a supervisor in operation. I was growing up. I didn't realize as a kid at that point, I was born in 59, that, I was really living through a kind of a unique experience and a lot of new roles in government, and being able to see a supervisor firsthand. I got to go around to a lot of events and do a lot of things. As you mentioned, I'm a fourth generation family out here in North County. And what I don't really bring up on a whole lot, which is kind of interesting, is that my family came out here in 1868, out in the Elkhorn area. And my great grandfather actually ran for county supervisor in this area in 1874. He lost by 38 votes. And then his neighbor ran, and a business associate and political ally ran. His name was Juan Batista Castro, ran 4 years later. He's the founder of Castroville, and got elected supervisor, and then went on to the assembly. Juan Batista Castro is really a very remarkable man. So when I got into this, I didn't really think about that. I was really kind of continuing. It was probably the longest political legacy in this county, but I guess it sort of is. As you know, when I started running onto this and this whole campaign, a lot of people are saying, well, who is this guy? You know, he's a novice, he doesn't have a chance. Why is he doing this? And I did things a little different, as Marianne pointed out. I ended up knocking on 10,000 doors, really emphasized communicating with people. I didn't have a paid consultant, did just really kind of broke the rule book. And it had a, overall, it was good. But coming out of the primary, I had a big lead and I felt pretty confident I was going to get elected. And what was interesting is to see that during that primary, as I was doing all this door to door, a lot of my opponents were starting to copy me. So I'm hoping that is something that carries over and we get a little less of political consultants, especially those out of the area taking part, and more people that are just, you know, running because they know the issues, they want to have something to say, and they go really to the people. And I think that's really important when you're talking about elected offices. I you know, would, you know, want to say here before I really get into a lot of things is I can't do anything on this job without my staff. I mean, this is and the 3 women working on my office have been just extraordinary. As you know, it's not just taking calls in and dealing with problems. It's, I also sit on 27 committees. And I'm sort of thinking that, well, now maybe this is what the Board of Supervisors does, is sort of a hazing with new supervisors when they come in. They say, hey, let's give this guy a whole bunch of committees. 27, you know, when I say 27 committees, that doesn't count the subcommittees. When I look at the ones of all these that I can be involved in, I'm up over 30. We just had one today where I'm on a subcommittee, I'm an alternate, and a person can't make it. And I would be filling in on Thursday. Unfortunately, I already have an appointment for that. So it's really a real juggling effort into there. But I do want to introduce my staff, because I say they're the ones that help review these materials. They're the ones that the front line here taking the calls and dealing with issues. And I was really careful on selecting the 3 of them. So first one, I want to introduce my Chief of Staff, Marilyn Vieira. There's Marilyn up here. By the way, talking about history in North County and everything, her family beat mine coming into Moss Landing by a couple of years. And our families have known each other since basically the Civil War. So kind of interesting. And one point I should point out about my staff is all 3 are either native to North County or Salinas. And I think that's really important. So I also want to introduce Leonie Gray. Leonie, some of you may remember, was my campaign manager. And Leonie, why don't you raise your hand and people can see who you are there in case they're missing you. Yeah. And Leonie, I've worked with Leonie close to 2 years now. She knows me better than I want her to know me, because she kind of knows how to play me a little bit. So that gets a little scary. And the other person I want to introduce is Leonie's a policy analyst. My other policy analyst is Vanessa Azevedo. Vanessa, why don't you? Yeah. Vanessa is somebody who I met. She's from Los Alamos area, going around knocking on her door, and had chances to talk with her during the campaign. And she's been just invaluable in dealing with the crisis in Pajaro. So, again, I can't do without any of the 3 of them. They've been extraordinary. So one of the things I found was really interesting is after the election, find out that I've won. And it's like the first thing that comes up the next day is like, wow, what did I get myself into? I didn't know if I really expected I was going to win or not. I knew I just wanted to run because I felt things were working right, and I wanted to try a different approach on a campaign. So then I get elected and I start realizing, well, I kind of know what this job is, but I'm sure it's changed a lot since 1977. So exactly what has changed? I know there's a lot more complications of government. It's bigger, a lot more responsibilities. So I go through the first few weeks and have a little bit of contact with the county, and then it starts to reach about, about the 5th or 10th of December, I start realizing, well, I'm going to be taking office in a month. And nobody's really called me from the county to tell me what I should be doing and what's going on. And I learned at that point that there is no transition process for supervisors coming in. And I guess that's because you really don't have people coming in from somewhat from the outside like I was that often. The two of the previous supervisors that were elected, Wendy Root Askew, Chris Lopez, were both aides for Jane Parker and Simone Salinas. Mary Adams, did come in from the outside. Mary got elected in June. She had 6 months to sort of adjust and get a handle on things. I didn't have that luxury. So around the early part of December, I figured I better start taking this bull by the horns and figuring out exactly what's going to happen when we go in there on day one. So I did contact John Phillips' office. He did reach out and had been helpful in meeting a couple times and given me some input. And he basically let us in about a week early. Of course, that was when the county offices were shut down from roughly the Christmas to New Year's break. But we were able to get in, kind of see the layout of the land here, what we needed to do in organization, and get a few little things going. So going into January 3rd, that's when I was sworn in. And I had already been pulled in over that weekend into a number of county emergency meetings because there was concern of flooding going on right then over that weekend. One of the communities that in my district is Bolsa Knolls, which is just out of Salinas, unincorporated area. They had were experiencing a number of floods. They have a constant flooding problem. Then there was a threat on the river and Barrow. So all this was going on, and here I was being pulled in even before I was sworn in to sit in on these meetings. I go in and get sworn in. The first thing that comes up is there's an emergency meeting for this new agency on the river. It's the acronym is PERFMA, which is Barrow Regional Flood Management Agency. It's to be the agency that is going to aid in the guide, I should say, the rebuilding of the levees, which have been there since 1949. There's $400 million in state and federal funds that are being laid down for that. It's going to be a 10-year project. Unfortunately, we had these rains come before that could be put in place. So we had this meeting is the same hour that I'm getting sworn in, and I had to have Marilyn go and fill in for it because we didn't have our computers still back here. They're getting in our office. We weren't sure how to use the phones, and I really don't remember exactly what went on that first week outside of just a lot of confusion, sitting on meetings, trying to get a handle on things. And that was really a real challenge going through with this. Is Monterey County is a pretty good sized organization with over 5,000 employees, a lot of different departments. There's a lot of outside organizations, agencies, I should say, and organizations that it's involved with. And I really didn't know the roadmap for all of those. So it kind of is a blur a lot that first month because we were just jumping around from crisis to crisis while we're trying to organize, while we're trying to learn how to use the county's computer system. I had a 90-day plan coming into office that kind of went right out the window at that point. There was that 90-day plan is long gone. I'm hoping to be able to fill in some of the gaps that we didn't really get to address during that time period. But in January, we were really under a threat of the river breaching at the location where it did breach. I know it came really close. Remained a lot of issues on potential flooding and other kind of damage that was done from the storms through February. And then of course we had the flooding in March, which we're still just really getting into a lot of the rebuilding and the reintegrating the folks back into their community. One of the real challenges What also is that you get elected as a supervisor and suddenly everybody wants to reach out to you, especially people who haven't been necessarily taken care of for one reason or another previously. Or so we had this huge amount of meetings going on. I got appointed to 27 committees, which tend to be overloaded in the beginning with their initial meetings. Had the whole flooding issue and the threat of it going on. It's really basically been somewhat of a blur. And so when I look at, it was interesting to see the League of Women Voters newsletter here, and list my priorities and these things. I go, yeah, that is my priorities, but I realize I haven't been able to dig into those to a great degree. This job is interesting in the sense that you deal with some really big policy issues, but if you're really doing this right, you're dealing with a lot of small problems that people have. And I really, tried to impress that on my staff, and I know they've been really good onto this, and my own self too, is making myself available for going out to that. I've had in the last week a couple of things where I went out to where somebody's concerned out in Aroma, so the tree that's eucalyptus tree that's leaning across the road, they had a tree come down right near there during January, and it blocked 60 homes, 60 basically residents of 60 homes inside an area. So they're concerned about this tree. I went out and met with them on this, saw that, got a hold of Public Works. There was another one just a couple days ago out in the Perrindale area where there's some bird cannons that have been going off and really causing problems for a person. Went out there and talked to them. Both of those incidents, right off the bat, what the folks there had said is, this is great that you're out here. This is just, I don't care if you can fix this or not, you just showed up is enough. Well, that's a pretty low bar. I mean, so I do want to fix something. But for me, it's shown how this position has really changed over the years, because that's what I remember a supervisor should be doing from my dad's experience. Is people would call, he'd go out and check on problems. And I know all the supervisors do that, but it matters to the degree that you do it. I actually like going out, and if somebody's got a problem with a pothole in front of their driveway that just doesn't get fixed, I don't mind talking to them about that. I mean, that's sort of my job. This is a local government. This position isn't too big not to be able to talk to anybody that wants to talk. And that's the way I view it and see this as. Going about the district a little bit here is, and I think it's important to realize here in North County and North Salinas district is really a little bit different than the others. And each of the districts have their own uniqueness to it. District 5, which I think a lot of you are in, I'm glad I don't have that district that Mary has. Even though she doesn't have a majority of unincorporated residents, it goes from basically the Salinas River all the way down to the end of Big Sur at the county line. It's a huge district, and I'm glad I don't have to deal with that. And much the same thing with District 3. Chris Lopez's district goes from Salinas all the way down to the county line down the valley. And while there aren't as many people in the unincorporated areas in that district, there's a lot of farmland. It's a whole different issue. Then you have the other two districts. So Wendy would ask you, as Wendy's got, I think she said 5 cities inside her district, which requires a lot of coordination into there. Plus, she does have a small unincorporated area that tends to be very vocal and has special needs. Luis Alejos is all in Salinas. It's a different situation out of there, and mine, of course, is out here and is North Salinas, basically the area from Northridge and Creek Bridge on north. And it, as pointed out from Marianne and in the newsletter, it's the only supervisorial district with a majority of unincorporated residents. Actually, half of the unincorporated population of Monterey County lives in this district. And one thing I really like about this is I can go from pretty much anywhere. my home is kind of right in the middle, but the office is a Castro. But I can pretty much go from anywhere and in 15 minutes go to another part of the district, which makes it really easy to go out and see people's problems and address them. And that is a real advantage. The disadvantage is when you end up putting 60,000 people, 55, 60,000 people in a relatively close area, you get a lot of problems. And that's a special challenge in itself. What is really unique about here is North County isn't just really North County. It's 7 or 8 distinct communities. We've all heard of the one in Pajaro, but there's also Los Lomas, which is just north of there. There's Aromas, which is split between 3 counties, primarily between 2, but Santa Cruz has a chunk in there. There's Castroville, there's Moss Landing, there's Prunedale. You have these other little areas inside there like Elkhorn. And then you have 2 communities that are just outside Salinas with some special problems themselves. One's Baranda, they're unincorporated communities, and one's Bolsonols. And they're sort of in a, how should I describe it, as a real twilight zone in jurisdictions, because they're within the sphere of influence of Salinas, but they're still handled by Monterey County. And I think they tend to get a certain kind of neglect that way, even though they've got 2 governmental bodies on them, so that there's a lot of spillover. There's a lot of spillover, and as people don't know where to go. Do I go to Salinas for this? Do I go to the county for this? And sometimes the county or Salinas will kind of shove some of the issues away to the other jurisdictions. So I have a particular concern and interest in there as well. We had one issue, I had a homeless issue problem in the Baranda area that actually spilled across the boundaries of both jurisdictions and took a little special handling out of that. I think what touch upon a little bit here is, because it's been in the news a lot, is the community of Pajaro and the whole levee situation there. Just to understand some of the frustrations that have gone on, is the levee there was built in 1949 by the Army Corps of Engineers. That was supposed to be something that would address the flooding issues that had constantly affected that community. It was built in 1949 by the Army Corps. In 1955, it flooded. The levee lasted 6 years before it failed. And we still have that basically same levee there. Now, this new $400 million project is supposed to go through and create a 100-year levee. So it's only going to be filling once in that 100 years. I'm not so certain about that because of climate change. And when you look at all the storms we had here in January and February and March, as bad as they were, there's a prominent meteorologist here on the West Coast. His name's Daniel Swain, and he's pretty familiar with weather patterns here on the West Coast and climate change. And his comments are that what we saw in January and February and March, these aren't the major storms that we're worried about with climate change. These are a small fraction of what we could really face. And when you look at that, then we start to realize it just isn't that river. It's the Salinas River. It's the Carmel. We're probably facing something a whole lot worse than what we're seeing as we go down the future. So I say the flooding happened in 55. It's happened multiple times since then. A lot of people are frustrated now because it happened in the mid-90s and it's still happening again, but it doesn't matter how well you maintain a levee. If it really wasn't built to contain storms like this, it's not going to work. And that's part of the problem. I'm hoping we're going to move past that to a degree. One thing is I'll just kind of give a little breakdown here on responsibilities of supervisors and the structures on these committees. As I said earlier, there's a lot of policy issues we vote on. One of the issues we've been facing up here with short-term rentals, of course, which I know probably has affected a lot of you in Carmel Valley. There's other issues that will come up at time to time on housing policy or preservation of agricultural land. Social services, of course. I mean, this seemed like everything goes through the county eventually. And so on the board, we have of these 20, the 27 committees I'm on, which is probably about half of the number that there are out there. And some of them have a couple of board members, some of them have more than that. Is that we have this, in our terms of our structure, we have what are called standing committees. And these are about 6, 7 committees that are things such as environment and alternative energies, the budget committee, capital improvement committee. I'm on, I think, 5 or 6 of those. I can't remember how many that is now. These are really committees that have just 2 supervisors to them, because you can't have a 3rd supervisor on this subcommittee. And they're basically subcommittees to the board. If you have 3 supervisors, then you're violating the Brown Act. So you got 2 supervisors, and those things that come through there and get approved or discussed, pass on to the board. There's also a few committees are called ad hoc committees, which are basically these board committees, and these are not ones that are permanent. There was one on animal services, because Salinas and Monterey County are combining their animal services programs together and one shelter. I don't know if that's moved off the ad hoc. I think it's still on the ad hoc, but it was kind of recomposed here a month ago. And of course, I'm happen to be on that, the representative for the board on that, with some people from Salinas. So there were some COVID ones, for example, that when COVID was a bigger issue. So these are ones that get onto it. And then you have this big bulk of committees, which we refer to as non-county committees. Now, yes, they are with the county, but they also go outside the county's jurisdiction. It's like AMBAG. It's like the like LAFCO. There's a lot of smaller ones too. We've got representatives on the Arts Council, for example. Gosh, I just 27. I can't remember what they are now anymore. I think my brain's gone into overload onto it. But these are a lot of committees where the board appoints somebody to be on there. With AMBAG, for example, we're dealing with representatives from different cities and San Benito and Santa Cruz counties as we put together plans to kind of coordinate. And that's one meeting I have tonight, for example, out in Marina. So these have been a sort of a challenge in a way, is figuring out where my role is in these, what exactly they're doing, because 1, I'm on so many, but 2, there's been so many other things that have consumed a lot of my time. I'm thinking now as we move ahead, I'm actually going to be able to address these a little more detail and be a little more efficient. The one advantage to being what I really call, this is sort of like language immersion with all these committees and a lot of different branches in the government, is I'm going to come out of this with a lot better grasp of the county government than if I'd just been on a handful of them. And next year I will be chair of the board, so that will be definitely helpful. I'll tell you, this is a job that 60 hours a week anyway, some weeks more. My free time, I get going out and actually working on my farm and be with my dog and, see my wife, of course, too. And I should put her last. I should put that for first up there, especially since she's listening. But I'll hear about that later tonight. So it's a job with a great deal of flexibility. And as my dad always used to say, he says, you really can do a lot in here. And I can see that. You can really deal with, especially when you look at individual problems that people have. And, again, a lot of them are really small. They seem to the outside, but they're important to that person. And that's what I see as important down to there. One of the issues that came up early on was, and this is one I'm particularly proud on, as I was able to help on, because I don't know if a lot of other supervisors would have been able to, and it really comes from a historical knowledge of the county that I have, and being that I have a big chunk of my dad's files from the 60s and 70s, which gives me a lot of that, and as well as many years of talking to him, is that one of the first issues we faced was somebody had a home, an older home that was built back in the 1950s, and the county had cited them because of an illegal garage conversion that was reported to have happened in 1961. And so it was asked, we can't find a permit for this. You're going to have to change this. You're going to have to remove this. Well, the fact is, as I brought up right away, is that in most of the unincorporated counties of Monterey, communities of Monterey County, we didn't have a building code till about 1963, at least out in North County, we didn't. So you could do that conversion and didn't have to have a permit. And that's one of the things I learned in this process, is that actually 28% of the homes in the unincorporated Monterey County were actually built before 1960. So this is an issue which can come up quite a bit. I've talked with the Housing Community Development, and I think they're going to be moving in this direction here eventually, of getting a better historical knowledge of what's going on, because this is somebody who had owned the home for 20 years. They weren't the original owner. They didn't have a permit. There was no permit, and they were being asked to prove it. That's the kind of things that I feel really glad to help out on, because I can't blame the people who are working out of county. They don't, a lot of the new people coming in who are in code enforcement don't know what the history is, but the county should have that. And those are the kind of things which I find particular pleasure in, more than sitting in a chair, voting in 27 committees at that point. So I don't know. I've talked probably about half an hour here, kind of giving you a little gist of things. I really would like to just open up to any questions that you folks have.
Great. We have an array. Thank you very much. We have an array of pre-submitted questions, and some of them would ask you to deepen things you commented on already, and others open new topics. And I haven't been able to figure out a way to be entirely coherent. So I think we'll just plunge right in and jump from one to another. It's budget time for the county, and there are, of course, going to be difficult decisions. Do you have some comments about what stands out to you as key choices that will need to be made for the budget this year?
Sure. We do have a little bit of money to spend this year on the budget. There's a little bit of a surplus. We still have some ARPA funds, which is a lot of the funds that came from the federal government during COVID. That'll be down far more next year. And then after that, we have some projected deficits, which could be some problems. So with what we have now, what do we spend it on? There's a lot of different demands, from the sheriff's department to social services. Social services has had some real problem finding people who are qualified to fill positions. And so there's a lot of vacancies, and you're dealing with some issues such as child protective services and similar elements of social services that are really, really critical for people. So some of these are, some of the things that we have are shortfall in the county already have been pre-approved for positions. There's like 500 positions we can't find people to fill that are already approved on the budget. But as we look past there, on priorities of things that need to be taken care of, one of them I've been really strong on here is going back to the community of Pajaro again. The sanitation district there was built back in the 1980s and has been heavily neglected. The rates haven't been raised since 2007. They're paying $30 a month, and this is really a working, a lot of working people in this community, so their incomes are relatively limited. But as a county wants to look down to at the costs that are been going on, the failed infrastructure that hasn't been addressed, the lack of raising the rates an equitable way to cover increasing costs. And that's really on the county because they're the ones that are running it, and they haven't done that for 15 years. So some of the proposals have been to raise this from $30 all the way up to potentially around 160 plus a month. And that's an unacceptable amount to put onto a working class community essentially here. So the county has, trying to find a way to do some little subsidy onto that, where they have gone through, suggesting maybe have it down more like 100. They've also thought about the idea of privatizing it. And one of the companies that they offered to sell it to run, you may have heard of them. They're called Cal-Am. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they're going to keep the rates low for these folks out there. So I've been very strong on pushing against privatizing it. I've also said that I think the county is going to have to front the money this year for the maintenance of this and not raise the rates for $30. You just can't do that when people have been flooded, have lost their furniture, lost their their jobs, and are in dire economic stress. But what we can do is, over a period, I'm hoping of maybe 5 years, is slowly raise it, because it does seem like a lot of other communities are paying $80 or $90 a month onto this. And so it's got to go up. We know that, but you just can't go and just dump something like that on people all of a sudden. So that is a real priority, is that be covered. I'm also a really big supporter of the parks, and that's something that I kind of tie in really with my dad a lot, because he's the one that got the county's park system going and has been referred to as the father of the county parks system. We really have neglected this over the years, really bad. There's not even a range route at Jack's Peak. That's one of the things considering down there, where we're just kind of a shortfall everywhere. And parks, I think, are really important, again, for a lot of people who can't travel to Yosemite, can't do long vacations. A lot of these, the working people, this is where they have a chance to get out and do things. And I think it's important that. Plus, I think we all like to just have a short trip out to a park sometime, and or a barbecue, or just a hike, or doing something along that line. So those are two priorities that I've identified. I have expressed real opposition to one particular part in the budget for some funding. It's a small project, but to me, it strikes me as a perfect example of how we're misspending our government's money. And this deals with some illegal dumping and littering now that's being done. The bulk of it is out in North County. But it's been proposed to have $120,000 study, send it out to 1,600 people, a survey, develop literature, distribute it in the community to find out why people are illegally dumping trash on roads, and to see what we can do to change their behavior. Well, I don't think if you're going to send out a survey to 1,600 people and you're wanting to identify why people are trashing roads, I don't think those people are going to probably answer the survey any more than if you had a survey going out asking, why do we get burglaries? I mean, nobody's going to answer it. That's being deviant, essentially. One of the things that is attached to this, and this is what some of the things could go, is there's a pilot program of $8,000 to put up some cameras at known trash draw areas. And I would support even expanding that. And when you catch somebody, require them to go through an interview on why they are doing the trash dumping. Those are the people you want. You don't want to get people answering the survey that are abiding the law and are just complaining about trash. And then put them through a class and tell them this is what sort of like a traffic class in a way, when people have to go through those traffic classes, but You put them through that and you tell them, if we ever catch you doing this again, you will be fined to the maximum. That's, I think, would be a much better use of this money. And the kind of things that I try to look at critically on the way we spend money. We have $1.8 billion in this county. Now, a chunk of it goes to the hospital, which is a private enterprise fund. But still, that is a lot of money. And I'm not sure we always are spending it right. So that's a long answer. I'm sorry to that, but I felt the budget's a pretty important issue.
It is. And now I'll give you a question that's just maybe a little bit more discreet, more limited. And that is the question. We have several questions here about the Moss Landing battery storage facility. And I just have to say that the questions themselves, I'm combining them. They embody maybe two different kinds of concerns. But anyway, there have been, I guess, 3 incidents there, fires, and the highway's been shut down. There are safety concerns with the lithium ion batteries and their flammability. And of course, that's a flooding zone and we're all in an earthquake zone. But on the other hand, this is a very important resource for shifting renewable energy into time when it's, becomes available and times when it's needed. So what are your thoughts about keeping it open, shutting it down, making it more safe? How can we have this or not have this battery facility?
Sure. I think part of the problem that happened is when this came to the county a few years ago, it never went to the Board of Supervisors. It just went to the Planning Commission because it had overwhelming support. Batteries, renewable energy, who could be against it? You had everybody from labor to business to people who are concerned about the environment. We're all in favor of this. But it's a new technology. And like any new technology, I don't care how good the purpose is, how nice it really seems. It really should have been looked at a little closer. And that's where we're at right now. Now, there's 2 companies there. And they're both going to want to expand. So as they want to expand, they're going to have to come back to the county for some permits. And I think we're going to have to take a hard look at things. We need to make sure we can contain a fire. I'm really disturbed about the one that happened last fall, the one at PG&E. A lot to do with PG&E's response, basically, to this. I mean, you had something where you had a fire, you had stay in place orders that were put out. Highway 1 was closed, and PG&E's response was, everything worked just like it should have. The fire was contained. Well, that might be great for containing the fire, but it put entire communities and disrupted people in real jeopardy. So what is going to be needed specifically as this comes up, I can't really say at this point. I think we've got to look at what the alternatives that come down, but it's going to have to be more heavily regulated. PG&E, for example, and at least PG&E does. I think both companies actually pretty much have on-site specialized fire equipment. We really don't have that with the North County Fire Department and with that same equipment. And I think it's important that we have the proper equipment to put these out in case there's some assistance that needs to be done. I think it's also important that the county really understands what's going on in here and has some regular inspections. We're going to need these batteries, but how much bigger should the place be there in Moss Landing? I'm not going to commit on that at this point because I think there's a lot of information that I have to kind of gather. There's a lot of concern in the community, about it. And there's just a lot we still have to know.
Okay, thank you. Let's get back to water and how there are the wrong amounts in the wrong places at the wrong times. I see a question in chat. Should the county adopt additional regulations for new development in floodplains?
Yeah. Well, that might be a case that we need to do. And yet when you look at some areas, Carmel, I don't know if there's any real development planned out by, along the floodplain there in Carmel. So the Salinas River, I'm sure there's several areas there that are put under jeopardy. The community of Aro is obviously in jeopardy. But if we don't have any kind of development there in that community, it's never going to have the growth to pay for the quality of life there. And in many ways, being on the side between Watsonville and there, there's a real feeling of neglect. So I think you got to kind of look at each one. I think there's already plans being done for some for a train station down there, for example. There's the train goes right through the community. There's kind of a sad joke on there in the community of Pajaro, and that they often refer to themselves as Little TJ, because when you cross that bridge into Watsonville, it's like crossing from Tijuana to San Diego. Because you look at Watsonville, they've really developed a downtown, and you come right across the bridge. The first thing you see is a burned out building, and you see, businesses that vacant lots that sometimes are kind of unkempt. So I think it's something we have to look at, but I think we have to look at every place a little different too.
And now let's turn to the matter of seawater intrusion, which is certainly a District 2 concern. This question is stating that there is increasing seawater intrusion in District 2 caused by over pumping by agriculture. And in 2020, the Board of Supervisors allowed their moratorium on new wells in deep aquifer in that area to lapse because they could not agree on stronger regulations. And since then, new wells have been drilled in the deep aquifer, and yearly pumping is greatly increased. Do you have any plans to introduce moratorium on replacement wells?
The real plans that I would like to see done is really deal with one of the easiest ways to recharge a lot of the aquifers to the Salinas Valley. And that is, we need to be able to clean out the Salinas River. I mean, in terms of plans putting a moratorium onto there, these are a lot of the things that part of my 90-day plan to kind of really look into and dig a little deeper. So I don't want to jump off into things right there or so much, but one thing I have learned really is that we got 20 to 50,000 acre feet of water coming down the Salinas River as an average that is being eaten up by arundo, which is an invasive species. And that water could be going through and recharging all the way from down the valley to up to towards the Castroville area. And that would, that part of the steps that we have to do. Essentially right now, I don't think there are a lot of people building putting a lot of the wells in there, from what I hear, on going into the deep aquifer. I think we shouldn't have any wells in the deep aquifer. Anywhere is a problem. It's just not the source of water we should be pulling out of, because it recharges so very slow. And this is something we need to take a hard look at, whether it's agriculture or urban, both, because some of the water that's used in the urban areas is from the deep aquifers going for landscaping or lawns or somewhere, and I'm not sure that's the best use for deep water coming out of these aquifers either. The one of the things I think we could utilize a lot better on water is during the winter from the wastewater treatment plant, we're dumping for about 3 or 4 months a year. We're dumping water into the ocean because we have no place to store it. You know, we have other sources that we can still utilize and perhaps, you know, cut down on this use of this deep water aquifers. And I think we just got to take a real big approach at it. I understand both, you know, this a lot of the concerns on this. And I'm also concerned. I don't want to cut into an economic problems for a lot of working people who are in agriculture, but at the same time, this is not sustainable, as you point out. So to go through and put a moratorium onto there, it's going to take, you know, several steps at the same time going about. And I'm hoping at some time here in the somewhat the near future, especially as we get a lot of the plans of the GSA going, that we can just shut this thing off everywhere on the deep water aquifers and not just with agriculture.
So a related topic, I guess all water is highly interrelated, is desal and your position on desal. The Cal-Am desal proposal would offer low rates to Castroville, which is using a lot of agricultural water, and the costs, higher costs would be borne by the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District residents. And isn't that a subsidy? And do you support Cal-Am's desal proposal? Or do you see another alternative?
I don't believe that the water coming from the desal is going for ag over there. It's coming into the Castroville Services District onto there, you know, for their wells out of there. So it's purely on residential. So I was going to follow up there on. I take a very leery approach on any company that is outside Monterey County coming in for doing a big project, because I don't think they really have the interest of the communities and the county at heart. I think, you know, they're in there to make a dollar, which is fine. But if something goes wrong, they're gone. And if we're you know, really looking at desal at any use down the line, I know, you know, there's a lot of different proposals being put out there. I like to see public use really considered as a primary interest in that, instead of a private profit. Excuse me, I'm bungling on my words here now. Private profit, because it's water is so precious here. You know, we really have to look at it in a holistic way on how it's done. And, you know, Cal-Am at this point, I don't think, you know, it's not going. They've got to deal with Marina. They've got to deal with a whole lot of conditions before they can come into place. And I understand the reason that they included Castroville in there was probably just to get some support over there and throwing that in as a bone over that way, which again, I will say is probably not the best way to deal with the water situation, is by pitting communities against communities. I really support Mary Adams' approach that she brought up last year, that all this water is really interrelated. And there's a lot of water down the valley that I think could be distributed a little better.
Okay, thank you. We have some questions that relate to the functioning of the Board of Supervisors and the general topic of incorporation versus unincorporated areas. So District 2 and also District 5 supervisors have many unincorporated residents for whom they provide constituent services that others might be receiving through, for example, their office of their mayor and city council. And do you think the system is working when we have such disparate districts here in the county?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we're a big county, and to have 5 supervisors, only 5 supervisors, which is the rule on every county except for San Francisco, is something that really should be looked at. Nobody else talks about it. I haven't had a chance to raise it. But when you got to spread from from Mary or Chris's district, basically at the edge of Salinas all the way down to the end of the county, again, I just don't know how you can handle that. Big issue in my district is people in Salinas wonder, like, why am I in with North County? And North County says, why is Salinas in with us? Only way we can change anything like that to get a little better regional proportion, geographic proportion, would be for Monterey County to become a charter county. We're a general law county. There's about 12 or 13 charter counties in the state. I know County of Los Angeles, 5 supervisors with 2 million residents each in each of their districts. I've tossed around the idea of saying, well, maybe we should have more supervisors than 5. I think it'd be worthwhile to discuss. I don't know if I get any support out of it, that if we had 7 supervisors, we'd have things like North County would have its own, Salinas would have, it just would have basically 2 3/4 supervisors from my understanding, and then the rest of the areas would. My real concern with the way we stand right now is I think with the way all the supervisorial districts fit into Salinas, that Salinas, which is really the big gorilla in the room here in Monterey County, could even get more out of proportion power. You have right now 3 supervisors, me, Wendy, and Louise, who have either all our districts or significant chunks in there. Chris Lopez's has a chunk of it. Mary's comes right up to the border. I think that's a problem in terms of dealing with, having representatives for each of the other areas of this county, whether it's Carmel Valley, whether it's Aromas, wherever it may be. They need supervisors that are a little closer and more attuned to their needs that they can bring up.
Thank you. I guess a related question might be, how do we deal with area-specific problems? So you alluded to short-term rentals having a special importance or resonance to residents of Carmel Valley, whereas in incorporated areas, they can have their own regulations about that kind of thing. And I'm sure that there are many other topics that must be dealt with by the Board of Supervisors and yet are of primary importance within one district. And how do you think the supervisors can collaborate to appreciate those problems and deal with them?
Yeah, I think the short-term rental issue should be relatively simple. Why it's been going on since, I think, 2016 without a solution it just shows you just how ineffective our government has become here at the local level. Basically, in Carmel Valley, if we look at this is a good example. The real problem is people who own a property or companies that own a property and don't live here. That's what I understand. There's somebody who has a small house on the side of their property that they're hoping to pay the mortgage or something for retirement. They're there watching what happens. My understanding is from talking to you folks in Carmel Valley is that you're not really concerned about that. You're concerned about those absentee landlords. So that's where it should be clamped down on. That's where it should be shut down on. If there's somebody not living there, then it's really got to either should be prohibited or looked at very, very rigorously. And that could be done dealing with just the Carmel Valley master plan over there. And then you get over to the Salinas Valley and you have a little different situation in that you have a lot of the vineyards around there, the wineries around there are wanting to have some short-term rentals for agritourism. Well, that should be to be allowed over there because one, you don't have the hotels, you don't, over there like you do on the Monterey Peninsula. So it isn't like the people coming into, renting a place in Carmel Valley don't have a place to stay. They have a place they can stay in Monterey. Place has been approved, or Seaside, or wherever it is. When you get over to the Salinas Valley, it's a little different environment. So I think it's possible to separate these by community plans and let each community have its own say on what it wants.
Okay, thank you. All right, we got to have some lightning round, and so that no one's excluded here in the chat. Mickey Welsh is asking
I'll be quick.
That you're serving on the committee to propose oversight of the sheriff's office, and that's something we are looking at here in the league. Are you in favor of citizens oversight, either citizens alone or with an inspector general?
Yes, I am. And Wendy and I are on that committee. It's sort of the initial committee to decide whether it's inspector general, oversight, how it's going to go. We haven't had a meeting yet. I'm open to either.
Okay, thank you. And someone's wanting to know about your budget and how many staff you're able to hire and whether the number of committees could be trimmed down.
I don't know about the other committees. It would be sure be nice. Each supervisor gets 3 staff. You do have, if you have, each supervisor's office has the same budget. So you have some flexibility inside there. If there is some excess money inside there, you can hire a temporary staff into that. One thing I have to say, the benefit of my predecessor is he did not have a full office staff. He was the only supervisor, had just two staff there his last year. So it left me a little better flush this year. And that's been helpful as we've dealt with a lot of problems and having to get new equipment in and do some other things in the office.
Okay. Then going back to the issue of incorporation, Dennis Amar has asked, should Castroville incorporate? And I don't know what considerations Dennis is thinking about, but have you thought about that?
That's been discussed in the past. There's been multiple efforts to do it. It's usually fallen to the wayside because of the concerns about it just couldn't finance itself. But that was before this industrial park by Blackie Road was really developed. I just had some people in here a couple of weeks ago who were bringing up that possibility again. I mean, I think it's whatever the people want, is my view.
And just to come back and wrap up, maybe give you a chance to comment on, you came in presumably feeling optimistic about some things that you could accomplish, and do you have any general comments about how your priorities have shifted or your optimism or pessimism has changed? Any closing thoughts for us on your view now?
I'm very optimistic. I put a lot of time into this, obviously, but I can see results. And, I would like to get into some more really long-term, substantial changes to try to make things work better. One thing that I'm particularly interested in is the many different advisory committees that there are in the county. I think need to be empowered, need to have more influence, need to be able to put their viewpoint directly to the board, not have to go through staff. I think, there's a lot of little steps like that. I brought up the point about, I think it might be a good idea to have the 7 supervisors. I don't know if you can get support for doing that. But I look at a lot of these institutional changes. I'm trying to put things in place just so that the people in my district have a more of a direct communication with their supervisor and their county government. I'm trying to find little committees I can put up in each neighborhood committees in each of these communities so that people I can talk to about issues and have some give and take. And the other thing I think is really important is we got to find a way to communicate better for the county government, because we used to have newspapers, and the newspapers would report on city council and board of supervisors meetings. After several articles, you knew what was happening. Now, the newspapers we have are barely surviving. And in some areas, there's no newspaper at all. And I'm going to call Salinas that because I don't think they have a newspaper there anymore. And it's not, at least not a real one. So this becomes a role that government's now got to find a new way to put out in readable, plain, English and Spanish, plain language to folks so that they know what's going on in their government. They know convenient meetings. They know what decisions have been made.
Great. I think that that's a very interesting closing point, and of course, one that's going to appeal to our members here on the League of Women Voters, where we always like to be following these many important proceedings. So thank you for your time. We're winding up exactly at 1:10. I think we were able to go in depth on many things, and we thank you for your thoughts and for your service. And we hope to see you again.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure. I appreciate all the great work that you do, and thank you.
Okay, great, everybody. And see you next month at this weird time of you're checking into the church at 11:15. We're starting business early so that we can have time for our speaker. Thank you, Glenn, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for wonderful
Bye-bye.
questions. Bye.